The morning fog slowly rose above the rooftops of Lowton, a city of 72,000 people located in a valley between the hills of Ohio. In the central part of the city, where old red brick buildings stood side by side with modern office complexes, the business day was already in full swing. Judge Robert Harding parked his dark blue sedan near the courthouse, a massive neoclassical building constructed in the early 20th century. At 58, he looked distinguished, tall, with graying temples and piercing gray eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. His three-piece suit was immaculately pressed, his tie perfectly knotted, and his leather shoes polished to a shine. As he climbed the marble steps of the courthouse, Harding nodded to familiar lawyers and staff. In his 20 years working in this building, he had earned a reputation as a fair but strict judge. His decisions were rarely challenged in higher courts, and his colleagues treated him with respect bordering on reverence. "Good morning, Your Honor," greeted his secretary Margaret, a woman in her 50s with neatly gray hair and an invariably serious expression. "You have 3 cases today. The first one starts at 9:30. "Thank you, Margaret. Is my coffee ready?" "Of course, as always." Harding walked into his office, a spacious room with high ceilings, bookshelves along the walls, and a large oak desk in the center. On the wall hung his diplomas, photographs with various officials, and a family portrait: himself, his wife Sharon, and their adult daughter Caroline, who now lived in Chicago and worked as a doctor. At the same time, 12 blocks away from the courthouse, Emily Carter was hurriedly tying her apron, getting ready for her morning shift at the Riverview Cafe. The cafe was located in a busy part of town, not far from the university campus and several large office buildings, which ensured a steady stream of customers. Emily was 22 years old, and despite her simple waitress uniform, a white blouse and dark skirt, she stood out among her co-workers. Her long brown hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and her green eyes sparkled with intelligence and ambition. Working at the cafe was a temporary measure for her, a way to pay for her part-time law school tuition and rent a small apartment in a less prestigious part of town. Will you take the tables by the window?" called Susan, the shift manager, who was busy checking the cash register. "Sure," Emily replied, quickly scanning the room. The cafe was already filling up with morning patrons. Office workers rushing in for coffee before work, students with textbooks, and a few retirees who came here every day to read the newspaper over a cup of coffee. Emily had always been attentive to detail, a trait that had helped her in her studies and made her a good waitress. She remembered the preferences of regular customers, knew who drank their coffee without sugar and who preferred extra cream. This observant nature also helped her notice an elegant man in an expensive suit who had started coming to the cafe a few months ago. He always sat at the same table in the corner, ordered black coffee and oatmeal with berries, read the newspaper, and sometimes worked on documents. Emily didn't know his name, but she intuitively felt that he was an influential and wealthy man. His manners, the quality of his clothes, even the way he held the newspaper, everything spoke of his high social status. It was during one of these morning visits that they first really met. Emily approached his table with a coffee pot, as usual, ready to silently refill his coffee. "Are you studying law?" the man asked unexpectedly, noticing the constitutional law textbook sticking out of her bag. Emily looked up in surprise. "Yes, sir. Correspondence course." "Interesting field. What attracts you to it?" She paused for a moment. Most customers weren't interested in her life outside the cafe. "Justice, I guess. The opportunity to change things for the better." The man smiled, the first time she had seen him smile since she had started serving him. "A noble goal. I'm Judge Harding, by the way." "Emily Carter," she said, trying to hide her surprise. "A judge." That explained a lot. From that day on, their communication became more regular, although it was limited to short conversations during his visits to the cafe. Judge Harding asked her about her studies, gave her advice on studying law, and sometimes told her interesting stories from his courtroom experience. Emily was flattered by the attention of such a respected man, and she began to look forward to his visits. Meanwhile, at the First National Bank office in the city's business district, Jessica Morris was sorting through the morning mail. At 23, she had already been working as a loan officer for 2 years and had established herself as a reliable and attentive employee. Unlike her friend Emily, Jessica had chosen a stable career in banking rather than the uncertainty of a law degree. Jessica and Emily had been friends since school. They were complete opposites. Emily was a dreamer and an idealist, while Jessica was practical and cautious. But it was these differences that made their friendship strong. Jessica often worried about her friend's recklessness, while Emily helped Jessica to be more spontaneous. "Jess, are you going to spend the whole day poring over those papers again?" joked David, her colleague from the neighboring department. "Someone has to make sure people don't take out loans they can't repay," she replied, without looking up from her documents. Jessica was proud of her job. Unlike many of her peers who dreamed of quick money and fame, she understood the value of honest work and stability. This quality helped her to be a good friend. She was always ready to listen, give advice, and offer support in difficult times. That evening, in an elegant two-story house in Oak Hill, a prestigious neighborhood in Lowton, Sharon Harding was preparing dinner. At 54, she had retained her attractiveness and elegance, although in recent years, wrinkles of fatigue and some concern had appeared on her face. Sharon had been the director of the Central City Library for 15 years. She loved her job, interacting with readers, organizing cultural events, and ensuring that knowledge was preserved for future generations. The library was her second home, a place where she felt needed and useful. The Hardings' home reflected their social status: antique furniture, paintings in expensive frames, Persian rugs, and a crystal chandelier in the living room. Everything was tastefully chosen but without excessive ostentatious luxury. Sharon had always believed that a home should be cozy, not a museum of wealth. However, in recent months, she had begun to notice changes in her husband's behavior. Robert started staying late at work more often, talked less with her at dinner, and sometimes she noticed him staring thoughtfully out the window, as if his thoughts were far from home. When she tried to talk about it, he responded curtly, citing his busy schedule at work. "Will Robert be home soon?" she asked herself, glancing at the clock. It was already 6:30, and he usually came home at 6. At that time, Detective Mark Collins was finishing his shift at the city police station. At 45, he was an experienced investigator with an impeccable reputation. 6 months earlier, he had transferred to Lawton from Columbus, hoping for a quieter job and a chance to rebuild his personal life after his divorce. Collins was a tall man with dark hair that was beginning to gray and attentive brown eyes. His experience working in a big city had made him an expert in complex criminal cases, but in Lowton, the crimes were mostly petty: theft, minor fraud, and occasionally bar fights. "Quiet day?" asked his partner, Sergeant Thomas Riley, a man in his 50s with a good-natured face and a substantial belly. "Too quiet," Collins replied, putting papers away in his desk drawer. "Sometimes I think I made a mistake moving here. At least in Columbus, there was something to work on." "Don't jump to conclusions, Mark. Cities this size have their secrets. They're just better hidden." Collins didn't know then how prophetic those words would be. Meanwhile, Judge Harding was finally leaving the courthouse. It had been a long and stressful day, 3 difficult cases, one of which involved a divorce with a large estate to divide. Such cases always exhausted him because behind every legal document were ruined lives and broken dreams. Passing by the Riverview Cafe, he glanced mechanically through the window. Emily was serving a young couple at a table, her movements graceful and confident. Something about her demeanor, the way she interacted with people, attracted his attention more and more. She wasn't just a pretty girl. She had an intelligence and ambition that set her apart from the rest. Harding caught himself thinking about her more and more often. It was wrong, he knew that. He was a married man, a respected member of society, and she was a young girl who could have been his daughter. But something about her awakened feelings in him that he had long considered buried under the weight of responsibility and routine. He decided not to go to the cafe today. Instead, he went home, where Sharon was waiting for him with dinner and questions about his day. As usual, he would answer briefly and politely, eat dinner, watch the news, and go to bed. The ordinary life of an ordinary family man. 3 weeks had passed since Judge Harding and Emily met at the cafe. During that time, their morning conversations had become an integral part of both their days. Harding came to Riverview every morning at the same time, at 8 o'clock, when the morning rush had subsided a little but before the student crowd arrived. "How's your procedural law going?" he asked on another Tuesday, settling into his usual table by the window. Emily poured him a cup of coffee, trying not to show how pleased she was by his interest in her studies. "It's difficult but interesting, especially the part about appeal procedures." "That's the foundation of our judicial system," Harding nodded. "Without the right to appeal, justice would be an illusion." An elderly man with a newspaper sat at the next table, but Emily noticed that he was glancing their way from time to time. In a small town, people were quick to notice unusual encounters, especially when one of the participants was as prominent a figure as Judge Harding. "Perhaps we could discuss this in more detail," Harding suggested, lowering his voice. "I mean, in a more relaxed setting. I have a good law library at home." Emily felt her heart beat faster. The offer was carefully worded, but she sensed something more than a simple desire to help with her studies. "I don't know," she replied, unconsciously playing with the tip of her apron. "That would be very kind of you." "Think about it," he said, leaving the money for the coffee and a generous tip on the table. "Education is an investment in the future." After he left, Emily stood at the window watching him get into his sedan. Something about the way he spoke to her, the way he looked at her, made her feel special. Over the years as a waitress, she had grown accustomed to customers either ignoring her or treating her condescendingly. But Judge Harding talked to her as an equal, as someone whose opinion mattered. Meanwhile, at the bank, Jessica was working on a loan application when her phone vibrated with a message from Emily. "We need to talk. Are you free for lunch?" They met at a small restaurant called the Old Town Grill, not far from the bank. The place was popular with office workers for its fast service and reasonable prices. Emily was already sitting at a table in the corner, nervously twisting a napkin in her hands. "What's wrong?" Jessica asked immediately, sitting down across from her friend. She knew Emily well enough to know that she was upset. "Remember that judge who comes to the cafe? The one who gives you advice about school?" "Yes. Today he asked me to come to his house to look at his library." Jessica frowned. "And what did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." He's a man in his 50s. He's married. He has an important job. Don't you think that's strange?" Emily defensively lifted her chin. "He just wants to help me with my studies. He has an excellent reputation. Everyone respects him." "That's exactly why it's strange," Jessica insisted. "Why would a respected judge invite a young waitress to his home? And where would his wife be at that time?" "You're being too suspicious." "And you're too naive," Jessica replied softly but firmly. "Listen, I don't want to ruin your mood, but men in his position don't do anything for no reason, especially when it comes to young, pretty girls." Emily wanted to argue, but something in her friend's serious tone made her think twice. Jessica rarely spoke so categorically, and when she did, she was usually right. "Maybe you're right," Emily agreed reluctantly. "But what if he really just wants to help? He knows so much about law. It could help me with my studies." "Then let him give you a list of books or recommend some courses. Why do you have to go to his house?" The conversation was interrupted by Jessica's phone ringing. It was the bank calling about an urgent matter. The friends parted ways, agreeing to continue their conversation later, but Emily couldn't get Jessica's words out of her head. At the same time, in the courthouse, Judge Harding was hearing a traffic violation case. Such cases usually did not require much attention, but today he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept returning to his morning conversation with Emily. He couldn't explain to himself what it was about this girl that attracted him so much. Of course, she was beautiful, but he had met many beautiful women. Perhaps it was her sincerity, the way she listened to his stories about the law, the intelligent questions she asked, or the way she looked at him, not as an unattainable figure, but as a human being. "Your Honor?" the defense attorney addressed him, obviously repeating the question. "I'm sorry." Harding shook himself. "Please repeat that." After the hearing, he went out onto his balcony overlooking the central square of Lowton. From here, he could see the dome of the city library where Sharon worked. 26 years ago, he had married her for love. She was intelligent, beautiful, understanding. But years of routine, predictability, and the same conversations over dinner had gradually extinguished the spark in their relationship. Harding was not a naive man. He understood that his interest in Emily went beyond a simple desire to help her with her studies, but he also knew he was walking a dangerous line. One wrong move and his reputation, career, and family could be ruined. Nevertheless, he took out his phone and sent a short message. "If you decide to visit, Saturday at 2 o'clock would be a good time. Sharon will be at a library conference in Columbus." At the Lowton Central Library, Sharon Harding was holding her weekly staff meeting. They were discussing plans for the upcoming book fair and problems with outdated computer equipment. But her mind was elsewhere. That morning, when Robert was getting ready for work, she noticed that he was taking longer than usual to choose a tie, shaving more carefully, and even using cologne, which he usually reserved for special occasions. When she asked him about his plans for the day, he replied evasively, referring to meetings with colleagues. "Mrs. Harding?" Her head librarian, Dorothy Clark, an elderly woman who had worked at the library for over 30 years, called out to her. "Yes, sorry. What were we talking about?" "The conference in Columbus this weekend. Are you still planning to go?" Sharon nodded, though she wasn't enthusiastic about the trip. Robert had always been interested in her professional activities, sometimes even accompanying her. But in recent months, he had become indifferent to her work, as if his mind were preoccupied with something more important. After work, she decided to stop by the Riverview Cafe, not because she wanted coffee, but because she had noticed that Robert had been mentioning the place a lot lately. "The coffee is good at that new cafe," or "I saw Johnson from the prosecutor's office at the cafe." The cafe was half empty. It was between the lunch and evening rush. A young woman with brown hair was standing behind the counter, wiping cups. Something about her movements, her profile, seemed familiar to Sharon, although she was sure she had never seen her before. "Good evening, what would you like?" Emily asked cheerfully. "A cappuccino, please." While the girl was making the coffee, Sharon studied her. She was pretty and clearly intelligent, judging by the law textbook lying next to the cash register. She was about the same age as their daughter Caroline. "Are you studying law?" "Yes, by correspondence," Emily replied, handing her the coffee. "I work here to pay for my studies." "That's commendable. Law is a difficult but noble profession." "So says a judge I know," Emily stammered, and Sharon noticed a slight blush on her cheeks. "A judge? There aren't many in our town. My husband is Judge Harding, I believe." Emily paled. "Yes, he sometimes stops by here." Sharon looked closely at the girl, noticing her embarrassment. "He's a good man and an excellent professional. I'm sure his advice helps you." "Yes, very much," Emily replied quietly. Sharon left with a heavy feeling in her chest. The girl's reaction to the mention of Robert was too emotional for a simple encounter between a customer and a waitress. And that blush, that timidity. That evening, Detective Collins sat in his apartment, sorting through files on a petty theft case at one of the city's stores. The work in Lowton was exactly what he had expected, quiet and predictable. But sometimes his experience with serious crimes made him pay attention to details that others might have overlooked. For example, last week he noticed an expensive sedan parked in an unusual neighborhood for such a car, near a student dormitory. The license plate belonged to Judge Harding. Perhaps the judge had business at the university, but Collins automatically made a mental note of it. Today, he saw the same car again, but this time near a cafe in the city center. Nothing unusual, but in a big city, such coincidences usually meant either chance or pattern, and Collins didn't believe in chance. Meanwhile, Emily sat in her small apartment, holding the phone with Judge Harding's message. Meeting his wife at the cafe had shown her how complicated the situation could be. Sharon Harding had struck her as an intelligent and perceptive woman, if she suspected anything. But another part of her mind insisted that this could be her chance. A chance to get real support in her studies, perhaps recommendations for her future career. Judge Harding was an influential figure in the city's legal circles. She typed a reply. "Thank you for the invitation. Saturday at 2 o'clock is fine with me." After sending the message, she immediately regretted her decision. Jessica's words echoed in her head, but it was too late. On Saturday at 1:30, Emily stood in front of the Harding's house in the prestigious Oak Hill neighborhood. The two-story colonial-style house with a well-kept garden and a circular driveway was impressive. It was the home of a successful, wealthy person. The judge opened the door almost immediately after she rang the bell, as if he had been waiting at the window. He was not wearing his usual formal suit, but a cashmere sweater and slacks, more informal than she had ever seen him. "Emily, come in," he said, stepping aside. "Welcome to my home." Inside, the house was even more impressive. High ceilings, antique furniture, paintings in expensive frames, and books everywhere. Entire walls of bookshelves filled with legal literature. "Impressive," Emily said sincerely. "The collection has been growing for years," he replied, watching her reaction. "Come on, I'll show you my study." The study was on the second floor and was even more impressive than the living room. A massive oak desk, leather chairs, and even more books. Diplomas and photographs of important people hung on the walls. "These books might be especially useful for your studies," said Harding, approaching one of the shelves. He stood very close to her, and Emily could smell his expensive cologne. "Miller's Procedural Law, Novak's Commentary on the Constitution," he listed, pulling out the books. "These are classics that every lawyer should know." Their hands accidentally touched as he handed her the book, and Emily felt an electric shock. Harding felt it too. She could see it in his eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, without looking away. At that moment, she knew she had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. 2 weeks had passed since Emily first crossed the threshold of the Harding home. During that time, their meetings became regular and increasingly intimate. Every Saturday, when Sharon was busy with her work or library activities, Emily would come to the house on Oak Hill. At first, they really did talk about law. Harding explained the intricacies of court procedure to her, told her about famous cases, and let her read books from his library. But gradually, their conversations became more personal. He told her about his youth, how he dreamed of changing the world through justice. She shared her ambitions, her fears, her dreams of a brilliant career as a lawyer. That Saturday, Emily arrived in a particularly good mood. She had received the highest grade on her constitutional law term paper, using materials from Harding's library. "Congratulations," he said when she told him the news. "I always knew you were capable of more than just serving coffee." They were sitting in his office, and Emily noticed that there was very little distance between them. Over the past 2 weeks, the physical closeness had grown gradually. Accidental touches of hands, his palm on her shoulder when he explained something complicated, increasingly long hugs when they met and said goodbye. "Robert," she said his name for the first time, and he flinched at the intimacy of the address. "I want you to know how much your support means to me." "Emily," his voice became hoarse. He reached out and touched her cheek. "You're so young, so full of life. Being with you makes me feel alive again." The kiss was inevitable. When their lips touched, Emily felt a mixture of fear and excitement. It was wrong, she knew that. But the power he represented, his experience, his ability to open doors to the world she dreamed of, made this forbidden fruit even more appealing. "We shouldn't," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. "I know," he replied, "but I can't stop." Their affair began that day. Emily understood the risks, but she felt special, chosen. Robert Harding, one of the most influential men in town, had chosen her. It was an intoxicating thought. However, on Monday morning, while Emily was working at the cafe, Jessica approached her with a serious expression on her face. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "We need to talk seriously." They met after Emily's shift at Riverside Park, not far from downtown. It was a quiet place with walking paths and benches under old oak trees, where they could talk without fear of being overheard. I saw you," Jessica said as soon as they sat down on the bench. "Where did you see me?" But from her friend's tone, Emily already knew what she was talking about. On Saturday, leaving the house on Oak Hill, Judge Harding's house. Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "Jess, it's not what you think." "What is it? Enlighten me." "We were studying case law. He has a wonderful library." Jessica looked at her friend with pain in her eyes. "Emily, don't lie to me. I've known you since childhood. I saw how you looked when you came out of his house. That wasn't the look of someone who had just studied law." The silence lasted several minutes. Finally, Emily confessed quietly, "There's something between us." "God, Em, he's married. He's 58 years old. He's a judge." "I know all that," Emily snapped. "You think I don't understand the complexity of the situation? Then why? What are you risking everything for?" Emily stood up and paced the driveway. "You don't understand, Jess. He sees potential in me. He can open doors for me that I never even dreamed of. With his recommendations, I can get into the best law firms after college. And you think that's free? That a man in his position won't want anything in return? We're adults. We both know what we're doing." Jessica grabbed her friend's arm. "Emily, listen to me carefully. This could end badly, very badly. For you, for him, for his family. What if someone finds out? What will happen to your reputation, to your career? No one will find out. We're careful." "I know, and if I could see it, so can others." Anger flashed in Emily's eyes. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying you should stop this before it's too late." "What if I don't want to stop?" Jessica looked at her friend for a long time, then sighed heavily. "Then I'll pray that you don't regret your decision." They parted on tense terms, and for the first time in many years, Emily felt that her best friend didn't understand her. Meanwhile, Judge Harding sat in his office in the courthouse, trying to focus on a divorce case, but his thoughts kept returning to Emily. What had started between them was crazy. He knew that, but he couldn't stop. At 58, he felt alive for the first time in years. With Emily, he was no longer just Judge Harding, but Robert, a man with passions and desires. Her youth, enthusiasm, and way of looking at the world made him forget the years of routine and responsibility. But the risks were enormous. If their relationship became known, it would mean the end of his career, the destruction of his family, and public disgrace. Judges must be impeccable, not only professionally, but also personally. The ringing of the phone interrupted his thoughts. "Robert, it's Sharon. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner at the Grand Hotel tonight. It's been a while since we've gone out together." Harding felt a pang of guilt. When was the last time he had paid his wife any attention? "Of course, dear, that's a wonderful idea." The dinner was weird. Sharon tried to make small talk, but Robert was distracted. She talked about the library's plans, new books, and an upcoming exhibition of local artists. He nodded when he should have, but his mind was somewhere else. "Robert, are you listening to me?" Sharon finally asked. "Of course, dear. You were talking about the exhibition." "I was talking about Mrs. Johnson from next door being in the hospital." "Robert, what's going on with you? You've been living in another world for the last few months." Harding looked at his wife, an intelligent, elegant woman with whom he had lived for 26 years. She didn't deserve what he was doing to her, but he couldn't find the strength to stop. "Just a lot of work," he lied. "Difficult cases, a lot of stress." Sharon looked at him searchingly. "Maybe you should take a vacation? We could go somewhere together like we used to." "Maybe," he replied vaguely. The next day, Detective Collins investigated a theft from an auto parts store. The owner claimed that expensive parts worth about $3,000 were missing, but something about his story didn't add up. While interviewing witnesses at nearby establishments, Collins stopped at the Riverview Cafe. Behind the counter stood the same young waitress with chestnut hair whom he had seen before. "Detective Collins, City Police," he introduced himself, showing his badge. "I'm investigating a theft at a nearby store. Did you see anything suspicious on Tuesday evening?" "I don't recall anything unusual," Emily replied, but Collins noticed that she was nervous. It wasn't because of his questions. Most people are nervous when talking to the police, but there was something familiar about her behavior. "Have you worked here long?" he asked, ordering a coffee. 2 years. "So you know all the regulars?" "Most of them, yes." Collins took a sip of coffee. "I saw Judge Harding here. Does he come in often?" Emily visibly tensed. "Sometimes, in the morning. He's a nice man, good reputation in town." "Yes," she replied curtly. Collins was an experienced investigator and a good judge of character. The girl's reaction to the mention of the judge was too strong for a mere acquaintance. Combined with his observations, The judge's car in unusual places, changes in behavior, it was starting to paint a picture. Leaving the cafe, he decided to pay more attention to Judge Harding. Not because he suspected anything specific, but because his experience told him that when respected people start behaving unusually, there is usually a reason. That evening, Emily received a message from Robert. "We need to meet. Urgent. Meet me at the park by the lake at 9 o'clock. The park by the lake was on the outskirts of town, in a quiet place where there were almost no people in the evening. When Emily arrived, Robert was already waiting for her, sitting on a bench overlooking the water. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "I think we're under suspicion," he said without preamble. "A police detective came to your cafe today and asked about my visits there." Emily felt a chill. "Jessica saw me leaving your house. She knows." "What exactly does she know?" "Everything. She asked me directly and I couldn't lie." Harding stood up and paced along the lake shore. "That changes things. If your friend knows, then the information could spread." "Jessica isn't a gossip. She won't say anything." "Are you sure? Are you willing to bet my career on it? My family?" There was panic in his voice that Emily had never heard before. For the first time, she saw him not as an all-powerful judge, but as a frightened man realizing the magnitude of his potential loss. "What do you suggest?" she asked quietly. "Maybe we should stop seeing each other, at least for a while." Emily felt something break inside her. "Are you breaking up with me?" "I don't want to, but we may not have a choice." She stood up and walked over to him. "Robert, you promised to help me with my career. You said I was special." "You are special, but no buts," she interrupted, her voice hardening. "You can't just use me and then throw me away at the first sign of trouble." Harding looked at her in surprise. This wasn't the submissive girl who had listened admiringly to his stories about the law. He saw something new in her eyes, determination and, perhaps, a threat. "Emily, I didn't use you." "Then prove it. You have connections, influence. You can get me a job at a good firm after college? A letter of recommendation, an introduction to the right people? That might look suspicious." "Then figure out how to make it not look suspicious." Her voice hardened. "You're a judge, Robert. You're supposed to be smart." For the first time since they had met, Harding felt that control was slipping away from him. Emily was no longer a naive girl blinded by his status. She was turning into a woman who knew what she wanted and was willing to fight for it. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'll think about what I can do." "You won't think about it. You'll do it," she corrected him. "And we'll continue seeing each other. We'll just be more careful." As they left the park, both knew that their relationship had entered a new phase. But now it was no longer a romance between an influential man and a young woman. It had become a game in which the stakes were getting higher every day. And Jessica, unaware that her knowledge made her dangerous to both sides of this forbidden relationship, was preparing for a normal evening at home, not knowing that her life was also hanging by a thread. A week had passed since their tense conversation in the park by the lake. Robert Harding had hardly slept, running through possible scenarios in his head. Every day in court felt like a test. He caught his colleagues' glances, looked for hidden meanings in ordinary phrases, afraid that his secret had already been revealed. Emily had changed, too. She was more nervous at the cafe, dropping dishes more often and forgetting orders. But at the same time, there was a new confidence in her behavior, the confidence of someone who holds the trump card. On Thursday evening, she sent him a message. "We need to talk. Tomorrow after work. The park by the lake, 8 p.m. Harding realized that he couldn't put off the conversation any longer. He arrived at the park before her at the appointed time. The place was deserted. Late autumn in Lowton was not conducive to evening walks. The lake was calm, reflecting the last rays of the sun. 15 minutes later, Emily appeared. "I've made a decision," she said without preamble, approaching his car. "What decision?" "Either you help me with my career right now, or I tell everyone about our relationship." Harding felt the world around him begin to crumble. "Emily, you can't be serious." "I'm absolutely serious," she said, her voice cold and determined. "I have photos of our meetings, recordings of our conversations. enough evidence to destroy your career. You recorded our conversations? Just in case, Robert. I'm not as naive as you thought. Harding realized that he had completely underestimated this girl. She was much smarter and more calculating than he had given her credit for. What do you want? A job at Preston and Associates. I know you have connections with James Preston. I want you to get me an internship there after I graduate, with the prospect of a permanent position. That's impossible to do discreetly. Find a way. You have a month. Harding was silent, realizing he was trapped. And if I refuse? Emily took out her phone and showed him a photo of them hugging in his office. Then, tomorrow morning, that photo will be sent to your wife, to the newspaper, and to the Judicial Ethics Committee. You'll ruin your reputation too. I'm 22. I'll survive the scandal and start over. You're 58, you can't. Harding realized she was right. For her, it would be an unpleasant episode in her youth. For him, it would be the end of his life. All right, he said quietly. I'll do what I can. Not what you can, what you must, Emily corrected him and headed for her car. Emily, he called after her. What about Jessica? She knows about us. Emily stopped. Jessica is no longer a problem. I'll take care of her. But Jessica was a problem, and Emily knew it. Her friend had been calling her every day, begging her to end the relationship with the judge. On Wednesday, Jessica had even come to her house. Look at yourself, she said, studying her friend's gaunt face. You look terrible. This is destroying you. Nothing is destroying me. On the contrary, my life is getting better. What life? Secret meetings with a married man twice your age? That's not a life, that's self-deception. You don't understand. Emily paced nervously around the small apartment. He can give me everything, a career, status, money. At what cost? You're turning into someone else, someone I don't recognize. People change, Jess. They grow. Maybe you should try it too. Jessica sighed painfully. If you don't stop this yourself, I will. What do you mean? I'll go to his wife. I'll tell her everything. Emily froze. You wouldn't dare. I don't want to. But I can't watch you ruin your life. If you do that, we're not friends anymore. If I don't do it, I might not have a friend, Jessica replied quietly. After she left, Emily sat in the dark for a long time, realizing that the situation was spiraling out of control. Jessica was determined, and she was capable of carrying out her threat. On Friday morning, Emily called Robert. We need to meet, tonight. We agreed to be careful. We have a problem. Jessica is going to tell your wife. The silence on the line lasted so long that Emily thought the connection had been cut. Robert? I'm here. When is she going to do it? I don't know. Maybe over the weekend. We have to stop her. How? Let's meet tonight at 9. I'll think of something. Harding spent the day in a state of near panic. Everything he had worked for over the past 20 years could be destroyed in a few weeks of madness. He couldn't let that happen. By evening, he had a plan. It was a dangerous plan, but he saw no other way out. At 8:30, he sent Emily a message. Change of plans. Meet me in the old warehouse district outside of town. Industrial Street, warehouse number 7. We need to talk to Jessica too. Bring her with you. Emily was surprised, but she thought he wanted to talk to Jessica, to convince her to keep quiet. Maybe offer her money. Jess, I need your help, she called her friend. What kind of help? Robert wants to talk to you, to explain the situation. I don't want to see him. Please, it's important. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. Jessica hesitated. Where is it? In the warehouse district. He wants a secluded place where no one will see us. That sounds strange. Jess, please. This is my last request. Against her better judgment, Jessica agreed. They arrived at the location at 9 o'clock in the evening. The warehouse district was deserted and gloomy. Old brick buildings, many of which had been vacant for years, created an oppressive atmosphere. Harding's car was parked next to the designated warehouse. I don't like this place, Jessica said as she got out of the car. Everything will be fine, Emily replied, but her voice also sounded uncertain. Harding was waiting for them inside the warehouse. The large empty room with high ceilings and dusty windows was lit only by the light from their cell phones. "Why meet here?" Jessica asked. "We need a place where no one can see or hear us," Harding replied. There was something strange in his voice that made both girls wary. "Robert, what do you want to talk about?" Emily asked. "About solving our problem," he said, slowly approaching them. "Jessica, are you going to tell my wife about our relationship? If Emily doesn't stop this madness, then yes. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable for me to watch my best friend ruin her life." Harding stopped a few steps away from them. "What if I offer you money, enough to start a new life in another city? Are you offering me a bribe? I'm offering a mutually beneficial solution. The answer is no." Emily saw Robert's face darken. "Jess, think about it again. No, Em. No money, no deals. Either you end this relationship or I go to his wife." Then Harding realized there would be no peaceful resolution. Jessica was adamant, and Emily would never give up the chance to build a career. There was only one way out. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, pulling a gun from his pocket. Both girls froze in terror. "Robert, what are you doing?" Emily whispered. "What I have to do?" "You're crazy," Jessica said, slowly backing away. "Maybe, but I won't let you ruin my life." "We can work something out," Emily began. "It's too late," he interrupted. "You both know too much, and one of you has already shown that you're not going to keep quiet." Jessica tried to run away, but Harding fired first. The bullet hit her in the back, and she fell to the dusty warehouse floor. Emily screamed, but her cry echoed off the empty walls. No one could hear her. "You killed her!" She rushed to her friend, but Jessica was already dead. "Now it's your turn," Harding said, turning to her. "Robert, don't. I won't tell anyone. I'll keep quiet. I can't trust you anymore." A second shot rang out a few seconds later. Emily fell next to her friend, her blood mixing with the dust on the floor of the old warehouse. Harding stood over the bodies, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. He had crossed a line of no return. But he saw no other way out. His life, his career, his family were more important than the lives of these two girls. Now he had to get rid of the evidence. He spent the next 2 hours carefully removing all traces of his presence in the warehouse. He left the bodies behind. They would be found sooner or later, but by then the clues leading to him would be gone. Returning home late at night, Harding rehearsed his version of events. Tomorrow he would be a shocked citizen who had learned of the tragic death of 2 young women. A grieving man who sometimes drank coffee at the same cafe where one of the victims worked. But deep down he knew that his life had changed forever. He had become a murderer, and sooner or later he would have to pay for it. The bodies were discovered on Monday morning by warehouse workers who had come to pick up equipment. The man's screams echoed through the deserted industrial area, and within half an hour, the crime scene was cordoned off by police. Detective Mark Collins arrived on the scene at 8:30 in the morning. As he surveyed the crime scene, he immediately realized that this was no random killing. 2 precise shots, no signs of robbery or struggle, an isolated location. Everything pointed to a cold-blooded, premeditated murder. "What do we know about the victims?" he asked medical examiner Daniel Walker. Emily Carter, 22 years old, waitress at the Riverview Cafe. Jessica Morris, 23 years old, worked at a bank. They were best friends since school. Collins frowned. He remembered the girl from the cafe, the one who had been nervous when he asked about Judge Harding. Time of death? Preliminary, Friday evening between 9 and 11. Shell casings? 2 found .38 caliber. The killer didn't try to hide them, but the place was thoroughly cleaned. No fingerprints, no obvious clues. Collins slowly walked around the bodies. Professional, someone who knew how to kill and how to cover their tracks. But why 2 young women? And why lure them to this place? Back at the station, he began studying the victims' lives. Emily Carter was a part-time law student who had worked at a cafe for 2 years and rented an apartment by herself. Her parents lived in another state. Jessica Morris was a bank loan officer, single, lived alone, and had a reputation as a responsible employee. Strange, Collins muttered as he studied their financial records. Neither had any large debts or suspicious expenditures. No connections to drugs or criminal gangs. He drove to the Riverview Cafe to interview Emily's co-workers. The manager, Susan, was crying, unable to believe what had happened. She was a good girl, she insisted. Hardworking, polite to customers. No one would want to hurt her. Did she have any enemies? Problems with ex-boyfriends? I don't think so. She was too busy with work and school to have a serious relationship. Any regular customers? Anyone who showed a particular interest in her? Susan thought for a moment. There was an older man in an expensive suit. He came in every morning and always asked for Emily. They talked about something. Do you remember what he looked like? Tall, graying hair, wore glasses. Acted like he was important. Collins felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Do you know his name? No, but Emily did. I once heard her call him Your Honor. Leaving the cafe, Collins was almost certain he knew the identity of the mysterious client. But a hunch wasn't enough. He needed proof. Meanwhile, Judge Harding was acting as if nothing had happened. After learning of the murder from the morning news, he expressed his condolences to the families of the victims and went about his business as usual. But inside, he was gnawed by anxiety. During his lunch break, Detective Collins came into his office. Your Honor, sorry to bother you. Detective Collins, I'm investigating the murder of 2 girls over the weekend. A terrible tragedy, Harding replied, trying to remain calm. How can I help? One of the victims, Emily Carter, worked at the Riverview Cafe. Colleagues said you were a regular customer there. Yes, I sometimes stopped in for coffee. It's a nice place. Do you remember this girl? Harding pretended to think. Brown hair? Yes, I think she served me. A polite girl. Did you talk to her about anything other than your order? Maybe exchanged a few words. She was studying law, if I'm not mistaken. I gave her some general advice. I see. Where were you on Friday evening? Harding felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained steady. At home with my wife. We had dinner and watched television. Thank you for that information, Your Honor. After the detective left, Harding realized he was under suspicion. Collins was an experienced investigator. It was obvious from his questions. He had to be careful. Collins, meanwhile, was checking the judge's alibi. His conversation with Sharon Harding proved revealing. Yes, we were home on Friday evening, she confirmed. But Robert went out. Where? He said he was going to the store to get some headache medicine. But he was gone for quite a while, almost 3 hours. 3 hours at the store? I was surprised too. When I asked him, he said he had stopped by the office to pick up some documents. Collins checked the security camera footage from nearby stores. Harding was nowhere to be seen on Friday evening. The next step was to examine the phone records. Emily and Jessica had incoming calls from a number registered to Judge Harding. Emily's last call was on Friday at 8:30 p.m., but the most important clue came from the warehouse security guard. The man remembered a dark blue sedan that entered the premises on Friday evening around 9 o'clock. I didn't remember the license plate number, but it was an expensive car. A man in a suit was driving. Collins checked Harding's car registration, a dark blue 2020 Mercedes. With enough evidence, Collins obtained a search warrant for the judge's home and office. On Wednesday morning, he arrived with a team of forensic experts. Harding tried to remain calm, but he was clearly nervous. Detective, this is outrageous. I am a respected member of the community. Your Honor, we have a warrant. Please do not obstruct the investigation. The gun was found in Harding's office safe. Ballistics confirmed that the bullets that killed the girls were fired from this weapon. On Friday morning, Collins arrived at the courthouse with an arrest warrant. Robert Harding, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Emily Carter and Jessica Morris, he said, handcuffing a man who, just a week ago, had been considered a pillar of the local community. The news of the judge's arrest shocked Lawton. No one could believe that a respected lawyer was capable of murder, but the evidence was irrefutable. The trial took place in an atmosphere of shock. The prosecutor reconstructed the crime: a secret relationship with a young woman, attempts at blackmail, threats of exposure, and the cold-blooded murder of 2 innocent women. Harding's lawyer tried to prove that it was a crime of passion, but the investigation revealed careful planning, the choice of location, the destruction of evidence, and the preparation of an alibi. Compromising photos and recordings of conversations with the judge were found on Emily's phone. It became clear that the girl had indeed tried to blackmail him, but that did not justify the murder. Sharon Harding filed for divorce before the trial ended. She testified against her husband, recounting his strange behavior in recent months. "I lived with a man for 26 years and didn't know what he was capable of," she told reporters. "These girls could have been our daughters." The jury reached a verdict after 4 hours of deliberation, guilty of first-degree murder on 2 counts. The judge sentenced Robert Harding to life in prison without the possibility of parole. "Your crime is particularly heinous because you abused the trust of the community," the judge said in sentencing. "You swore to uphold justice, and instead you committed one of the most unjust acts imaginable." Detective Collins was in the courtroom when the sentence was handed down. He thought about the 2 young women whose lives had been brutally cut short because of one man's greed and fear. After the trial, he visited Emily and Jessica's graves at the city cemetery. Emily's headstone was engraved with the words, "She dreamed of justice." Jessica's headstone read, "A loyal friend to the end." Collins understood that justice had prevailed, but that did not bring back the lives of 2 innocent girls. Emily may have made the wrong choice in trying to blackmail the judge, but she did not deserve to die. And Jessica died only because she tried to protect her friend. The town of Lawton slowly recovered from the shock. A photo of Emily was hung in the Riverview Cafe with the inscription, "In memory of our colleague." The bank established the Jessica Morris Scholarship for economics students. Sharon Harding continued to work at the library, but moved to another part of town. She became an activist in an organization that helped victims of domestic violence, believing that she had to atone for her husband's sins with good deeds. Detective Collins received a promotion and recognition for solving the difficult case, but he knew that the real heroes of this story were the 2 girls who paid with their lives for the ambitions and fears of others. Judge Harding's story served as a warning to the entire city. It showed that power can corrupt anyone, and that justice must be blind not only to the social status of the accused, but also to the position of those who administer it. In the maximum security prison where the former judge was now serving his sentence, Robert Harding woke up every day knowing that one wrong decision had destroyed many lives, not only those of the victims, but also their families, his own family, and the entire community that had trusted him. Justice had prevailed, but the price was too high.